I've been very clear from a young age about a lot of things, about what I want and what I don't want. And while I have wavered a little bit in other areas of my life, and that's fine, you learn from your mistakes, and you go back to who you are at your core, despite all of that. This is one decision where, as I mentioned before, I have never wavered back and forth on it whatsoever.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Kids Are Child-Free podcast. Now, I want to start today by making a little bit of a confession, which is that when I was really struggling and on the fence with whether to have kids or stay child-free, there was this group of women that I just couldn't really understand and that I frankly was quite envious of. And those were women who had always been definitively child-free. The women who said, I just knew that motherhood was not for me, that a life without kids was something that I wanted. And I guess I had a little bit of jealousy for that because these women were choosing a path and, in fact, really felt this to be part of their identity in the face of what one can perceive as really oppressive norms that being a woman means becoming a mother. Now that I'm on the other side of this decision and I am more confident in my child-free decision, I thought it would be interesting to invite someone on who sort of embodies the kind of person that I used to just scratch my head at and think, like, how do they know what they know? How can they be so sure? Today's guest is Shweta Ramkumar, who is a Southern Asian woman of color and a pioneer of dismantling the oppressive norms of the conservative, sexist, and patriarchal culture and society she grew up in the country of India. Now, Shweta is a self-professed educator, adventurer, foodie, singer, dog mom, minimalist, unconventional, child-free by choice, antinatalist, which we will be talking about today. Very interesting. If you're not familiar with the topic of antinatalism, we're going to learn more about this philosophy today, as well as an egalitarian. Shweta has lived and traveled all over the world. She's worked in a variety of industries and is currently an up-and-coming entrepreneur with a business that marries up her passions, skill set, knowledge, and experience. As an unmarried, child-free millennial woman, Shweta's life journey sets a strong example of breaking free from the shackles of disempowering cultural conformity, and she stands out as a proud black sheep in more ways than one. Welcome to the show, Shweta. We'll get right into it. I would love for you to just, first of all, to introduce yourself to our audience using your own words. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, Keltie. Thank you very much for having me on your show. It's a real privilege and honor. So my name is Shweta. I'm of a Southern Asian background, but I have been living in Melbourne, Australia for the past 2 decades, just over 2 decades now. I work in healthcare, and like you, I'm working towards becoming a coach, not in the child-free space, but in the space of healthcare. I am obviously child-free by choice, very proudly child-free by choice, I should say. Very much the black sheep of not only the world of society in general, but also the Southern Asian community. And we will obviously, hopefully, touch on that at some point during our chat. And a very proud dog mom. I have a little dog of my own, and I love to travel. I love to be creative. I love music, and reading and listening to podcasts, including yours. And and I'm quite the foodie. I love trying different cuisines, and just living a free-spirited and spontaneous child-free life. That's what I'm all about.
Well, we definitely share quite a few things in common, and I want to talk about travel a little bit later in the episode, but tell us, how many countries have you been to at last count? Because I asked this question on Instagram, fun fact, and I had probably about 20 or 30 people respond, and I think your number topped the list of most traveled to countries. You travel a lot.
Yes.
Where are you up, where are you
so
up to these days?
Until as of last month I was in Sri Lanka, 42. That's where I'm up to.
Wow. Okay, that's quite a few. Okay, so tell me, you are child-free by choice. You said proudly so. Is this a decision you arrived at over time, or is this something like an innate part of your being that you always knew? Tell us about how you arrived at the child-free positioning, if you will.
So it's definitely the latter that you mentioned, that it is as innate in me as the fact that I am, say, a woman of color. So it's that obvious a thing about my identity, for example. And the way I arrived at the decision, it goes back to the whole nature versus nurture element. Now, one of the things that people get very interested in my story is the fact that I am someone of my cultural background, which is Southern Asian. This is not a choice that people make, consciously. People from my cultural background, so it's just not heard of whatsoever. So I get a lot of questions about, how you may arrive at this decision. How are you able to navigate through the space? And we can obviously go into that with time. But yeah, how I got to it was, as I said, since the second I came out of my mom's womb, I knew that I wanted this type of life. I can recall the earliest influences behind this choice being the way I was brought up, not necessarily by my parents, but what I was seeing around me amongst extended family members. So I always saw this big division of labor in both the genders.
Mm.
So, in the sense that the man's job really has all he had to do was provide financially. The women did everything. So the women had to not only do the cooking and cleaning, they had to tend to their husbands' every women fancy and every wish of theirs.
Mhm.
So in terms, and not just the husband, but also his parents, and also taking care of the kids was again 99% of the woman's job. So I saw women in my extended family really centering their worlds around their husbands, their children, and their in-laws. And that is, without that, they didn't even have any identity or any other, they couldn't identify themselves in any other way.
Yeah.
I'm a wife, I'm a mother, and I'm a daughter-in-law. Without that, I'm nothing. I have no worth. And I
Mm.
saw that and I thought to myself, I never want to be in this position.
Yeah.
This also was compounded by the fact that my mother, despite coming from the same background, she was the only one amongst my extended family members who was, a highly career-driven professional woman who made her own money. And she was a big influence as well in the reason why I wanted to not only be child free, but also I wanted to be independent. So I wanted to be my own person. I wanted my own autonomy. I wanted to make my own money. And I wanted to have an identity that was not centered around, a man and children. So I wanted
Yeah.
to be my own person, my own woman. I wanted to be known to the world because of who I am, not because I'm someone's wife, mother, and daughter-in-law. And I just completely disassociated myself from that narrative, so to speak.
Mm.
And again, my mom, because of the way she was as a person, she made
Mhm.
sure that I have choices in life. She got married when she was 23. Fine, my parents are still together and they're very happily married, but she got married when she was very young, and she also had me like less than a year later when she wanted to really focus on her career and do something of herself. And so it held
Yeah.
her back a lot in life. And she was like, I want to make sure that you have more options in life than I did. So that's why she kept drilling into my head from a young age that you have to be financially independent. You have to be able to stand on your own 2 feet. You should never depend on a man and things like that. And it all resonated with me. So, and that's how it got started. And I think as a person, I am by nature a very free spirited person. I like having autonomy. I like having
Mm.
freedom. I like making my own decisions. I love my independence. I value it above anyone and everything. So to me, this makes sense. It aligns with who I am as a person. And then
Yeah.
obviously, the more I traveled and the different places I worked in, and when you travel, you see a lot of the world that's outside of your bubble.
Yeah.
And for me, it's like I can't think of anything worse to do with my life than not only raise children, but also bring a child into this type of a world. So it
Yeah.
all made sense and it all added up. And since then, I have not only never looked back without no regret, I've also
Yeah.
become very vocal about setting an example for the younger generation, particularly for women of color who feel a lot of pressure to still follow the pronatalist narrative that you don't have to do this if you don't want to, if it's not for you.
Yeah. All right. Well, for people listening, you might think, gosh, I can't relate in the sense that, of course, we have people listening who are ambivalent. They're on the fence. They're really questioning this. But I do think there's really some wisdom that we can glean from someone such as yourself, who is so unwavering and has this certainty despite having such intense sort of cultural, religious, societal narratives. Kind of this pressure cooker in which you grew up and were raised, which I also want to say, really interesting, and how cool that it sounds like, had a pretty progressive upbringing and, examples within your family. I think there's a lot that we can learn from that. And so I'm excited to delve into this more today and to hear what we can learn from you and what kind of wisdom you can share with us that can maybe help people to make this decision for themselves, because these external forces and factors, whether we're aware of them or not, they are there and they do bear a lot of influence for many people. Now, I was going to ask you if you ever had like questioning or ambivalence at any point, but what I'm hearing from you is like there really was no looking back. It sounds like you had this innate desire to stay child free or a lack of desire to be a mother. What you saw around you growing up showed you, no, I definitely don't want this. And that only became increasingly solidified. Is that true? Or
Absolutely.
was there ever a point of questioning? No. Okay.
Never, never, ever, ever. It's hands down, it's the best, most regret-free decision I could make in my life, and I've never questioned it. I've never been on the fence about it. I've never had a moment where I think, oh, I might have a child in this
Yeah.
at this age and this situation. It's never happened to me. Maybe I'm
Yeah.
one of a kind, but
Yeah.
yeah,
It's
never
certainly,
questioned
it's,
it. No,
yeah.
never gone back on it. Yeah.
It's certainly some child free women's story. It's not everyone's. And I do think there is a lot of nuance for many people. But again, I also think that there's like, these are the things that we hear about sometimes as women on the fence where we're like, oh my gosh, how does she just know? How is she so certain? And so I'm going to act on behalf of those people and ask you the questions that perhaps are on people's minds today. So the first question I have on that note is, how do you think that you were able to stay so strongly connected to your desires in the face of what we could perceive as so much opposition? Like, how is this a personality trait, or do you have a tactic that you can show us on how to like really like remain strong and connected with ourselves?
I think as a person, let's just put it as a personality trait, and let's connect a little bit with astrology. Now, I'm not someone who believes in all of that, but if you know the Aries sun sign, that is
Okay.
me in every the
Okay.
good, bad, and ugly, everything about it. So Aries, as people, are very very strong willed. They're very fiercely independent.
Mm.
They will very stubborn. So and I'm exactly all those things.
Hmm.
So I remember, even in childhood. So this is what, not only was I seeing this around me amongst my family members, when I started to go to school, it got even worse. So
Mm.
I was hearing from my friends, and we were about 7 or 8 years old. So we were that young. My friends were telling me about how they are looking forward to one day having a lavish wedding, having this type of house, having this many children when they are children themselves. And
Wow.
I remember telling them what I want to do when I grow up is travel the world, which I'm doing, have perform on as many stages, which I've done, and
Mm.
also have dogs, which I've done. So
Yeah.
if I want to do something, I do it. And I'm a woman of my
Hmm.
word. I will not hold back on it. Similarly, if I don't want to do something, I will not do it. So, for
Hmm.
example, I don't want to be a doctor. Never went down that road. Learned from my mother, not to
Yeah.
be a doctor.
Yeah.
She
Yeah.
is one, and I
It's
said I
funny.
don't want to do it.
My dad was a doctor as well, and a lot of people in families often follow in the footsteps,
Mhm.
specifically with that profession. Same here. Never had a desire to be a doctor.
Yeah,
Funny.
yeah. And yeah, so it's the same thing. Hypothetically, for example, I never want to learn German, for
Hmm.
example.
Yeah, me
Never want to
neither.
learn
But
it, and I've never done it. So
yeah,
and there's no need for it.
yeah.
And it's been the same thing that I've been very clear from a young age about a lot of things, about what I want and what I don't want.
Mm.
And while I have wavered a little bit in other areas of my life, and that's fine, you learn from your mistakes, and you go back to who you are at your core, despite all of that. This is one decision where, as I mentioned before, I have never wavered back and forth on it
Mm.
whatsoever. And talking about opposition, I was very privileged and fortunate in the fact that I'm not the first child-free person in my extended family.
You're
So
not. Okay.
I'm not, no. So there were people before me who did all the hard work. So when I told my parents at the age of 6 or 7, and this may have actually been after that interaction I had with my school friends, that just letting you guys know that I don't ever want to get married or have children.
Yeah.
And I was expecting the reaction to not be a very good one. But all they said was, it's fine. It's totally your choice. Whatever you
Mm.
decide to do, it doesn't bother us. And even my extended family, I mean, they don't know my views on marriage as such, but they also, because I'm so public now, almost all of them know that I don't want kids.
Yeah.
And no, I've never had any pushback, any opposition from anyone in my extended family. So I was very blessed and privileged that way. My mother also, because she works with a lot of child free people, because
Hmm.
she's in that type of a field of work where it's quite common to see child free
Okay.
people.
Hmm.
She does not find my choice unusual. She's like, oh, you're just one of these people that I work with. So for me, it's been quite easy, because as I said, my family's core values were, having an education, having a career, being financially independent, and being your own person. That's
Yeah.
what they drilled into me. For me, it was very easy to navigate through the space. If
Yeah.
I was, say, on the other side of the fence and I said that I want to absolutely get married and have children and live a traditional life, they would have been absolutely fine with that. But
Yeah.
no, it also, for me, it was very easy because I had the validation and support of my family. But even without it, because I'm a very strong-willed, stubborn type of person,
Yeah.
and also very clear-minded about, and self-aware, very importantly, always been very
Mm.
self-aware of myself. And that's what has got me through a lot in life, and in particular this decision. Yeah, and I do
Yeah.
not and I very proudly tell people that I am child free by choice, and I've got
Yeah.
tattoos on my body that that say that I'm
Yeah.
child free too.
Okay.
Hmm.
It's you bring something up that I think is interesting, and that is, well, so first of all, would you say the response has been equally as well received or positive or neutral, if you will, from people outside your family, specifically within, when you were being brought up and spending your early adulthood in India, or was it different for people outside the family?
Not particularly. I think most of the people, when I openly tell them that I'm child free by choice, 9 times out of 10, the only response that I've got is it's not for everyone. So,
Hmm.
there's like, good for you. It's not for everyone. That's what they've told me.
Yeah.
I've often been told I'm very smart for having made this decision. So
Oh, wow.
they've told
Interesting.
me it takes a lot of courage and it takes a lot of maturity and self awareness to make this choice, instead of just doing what society tells you and what the rest of the world is doing.
Yeah.
So I've got that as a compliment. Uh, yeah, I mean, as I said, 99. We're not even going to count the online haters and trolls. Let's not go there. So
Yeah.
their opinions don't
They
count.
don't count.
But yeah. So, but I'm talking about, be it my mom's friends, that Southern Asian community, that side, they've they've wondered why. The only thing, one person I remember asking me at the time,
Mm.
what if you meet the right person and he wants kids?
Hmm.
And my response was very simple: then he's not the right person for me.
Yeah.
So people, she just could not get their head around that fact, and she was like, oh, that's what people do, they get married and have, once they when you meet someone, you get married and have children. And I told her,
Yeah.
I know countless people who have not done that. They neither have got married
Hmm.
and neither do they have children, and I've done exactly that now. And I this conversation was 10 years ago, and that's what I'm at now. I have a partner. We live together, but we are never getting married, and we're not having children. And he also doesn't want children. So it was
Yeah.
very, yeah, it all worked out for the best.
Yeah. So the other point I wanted to make on that topic is that I think when somebody has like a really confident, affirmative perspective, decision in this case to be child free, I think the more unwavering we can be, the less we draw in people who want to kind of poke holes in our decision. You strike me as someone, don't just strike me. I mean, you obviously have a very strong presence and energy and confidence around this choice. And so, in some sense, I'm not surprised to hear that you haven't had pushback. We could argue there's a surprise in the sense that that's very different to the culture in which we're raised. And I also would like in a minute just to ask you a little bit about how things are today in India, if you see any shift happening. But I think I understand for people listening, it may be difficult to feel confident if you're unsure. But I do think the more we can kind of even have strength in our uncertainty and not to leave ourselves like open, if you will, to other people's poking and prodding and input on this decision, I think it can only serve us for the better.
100%. Yes. Yeah.
So you said it's been 2 decades since you've left India and moved to Australia. Is that correct? And do
Yes.
you go back much for visits? And presumably you're in touch with your family still? No, no visits or
No.
not.
No.
Is,
I haven't
okay.
gone back since for over a decade now. And
Wow.
again, there's no
Okay.
reason to, because my extended family is now A, we're really not in contact, and B, most of them
Okay.
don't even live in India anymore. So yeah.
Okay. Okay. Would you say you have any sort of attunement in terms of how things might be changing in India with regards to this child-free decision? If there's a rise in women or men, for that matter, who are choosing this path, or is that something you're?
All I can tell you is that my school friends, the ones I went to school with, the ones who are married, they all have children, or they're trying to have children. Um, the only thing that I know is that on Instagram, I'm a part of some of these Indian feminist groups. And
Mm-hmm.
over there is where I see a lot of women who are by and large anonymous, but they will post things on Instagram about how they are defying the patriarchy that our culture is so deeply entrenched in. So things like talking about how men, cooking and cleaning are is not just a woman's job, it's also a man's job. Women are allowed, should make their own living, and a man or his parents have no business deciding what a woman does with her life. So
Mm.
it is in that space. But I've seen also on these pages that they say that motherhood is 100% optional, so you don't have to go through this if you don't want to.
Yeah.
So while I know of these accounts, and yes, there are people who are, because I know quite a few child-free people who are in India, I
Mm-hmm.
think the choice is much more common in the big cities. Now,
Yeah.
again, I don't want to generalize about in terms of how easy they had it in terms of navigating, because even though you may live in a big metropolitan city in India,
Sure.
you may come from a family that's very conservative and very religious and whatever else.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't be able to tell you how they navigated through their journey. But what I have seen is that it is much more common amongst people in big cities,
Mm-hmm.
and it's both men and women who are collectively making this decision. And
Yeah.
I think I know that when they don't necessarily make, like, it was me, like me and my partner, when we first met, like within 5 minutes we did we before we even asked what each other's names were,
Yeah.
this, I said, this
Funny.
is this is the deal, I don't want kids, and it was the same from him. I think with them in India, they get married and then they mutually make the decision not to have children. So I
Okay.
think they're open to it at some point, but once
Mm-hmm.
after they get married, they collectively make a decision that kids are not for us.
Yeah.
But I'm sure it's making this decision and living with it in a country like India. If you're not a person like my type, who's too strong-willed, confident, whatever, it's not easy. So and because over there the culture is a very collectivist one, and people have no boundaries in other people's business, so they will just completely, they have no problem telling you to your face, say you look, you saw them 10 years ago and you see them now, they won't have any hesitation telling you to your face that you've put on weight, hypothetically. And they will have no hesitation asking you how much money you're making. And similarly, they won't hesitate to ask you when are you having kids. And if you say that you don't want kids, then you will get all the pushback. So
Yeah.
I feel for the people who are still living there and living with this choice. So I take my hat off to them. But I'm sure
Yeah.
that living with this choice in that type of country is not easy. Whereas for me,
Yeah.
I live in a part of the world where 1 in 3 people are child free. So it's not
Wow.
unusual here to be child free. So it's very,
Yeah.
I'm part of a community of about 1,300 women who are child free. So there's that. So
Okay. And is
yeah, it's
that
very,
in Melbourne specifically?
yes, specifically in
Okay.
Melbourne.
This is interesting for me, and to hear that it's such a high incidence of people who are child free, because I lived in Australia, but I was 26 at the time, 25, 26. And this topic, I hadn't made a decision yet. And
Hmm.
frankly, kids were something that was like a later problem for me to address or deal with, if you will.
Hmm.
So I'm not super attuned to it. Now, I'm not surprised to hear specifically in Melbourne, because it's from what I understand, a pretty progressive city. It's a young city, but that's quite a high number. So this is like it's no thing then. Essentially, is this true, or would you say this is kind of a contentious decision still, even in Australia, or also in Australia, I should say?
Um, it is a very case by case basis. Again, I can only speak from Melbourne. As I said,
Yeah,
this is the only part of the country that I've lived in,
yeah,
where and yeah, 1 in 3 people now. is child free, and they predict that by 2035 we will
Hmm.
overtake parents in numbers. The whole country
Wow.
will, so to speak. So over here, it's very easy, to be on an individual basis. I can't speak for people who have families who are pressuring them or whatever, or
Yeah.
exclude them or whatever. But it's easy to be child free over here, mainly
Hmm.
because you have a community of people who are also
Yeah.
child free, and I'm one of the people who is quite actively involved in the community. So
Mm.
like, they have events almost every week. Like, they're having an event tonight right now. I don't have the time to go to every single one of them, but I organize one or a couple of them every year.
Yeah.
And and I attend as many of them as I can. So we came together just before COVID, and now our group has grown to 1,300 plus. So yeah, we are a very close knit community, and everyone. Yes, we have the common shared thread of we're all child free, and most of us have pets. So that's another thing that we have in common. But also, the group is very diverse. There are people who are ethnically different, culturally different. We're all child free for different reasons. We became child free much later in life, and before I mean, because of different circumstances.
Yeah.
So even though there is a common thread between us, there's a lot of diversity in the group, and
Yeah.
when we get together, we always have a lot of fun. So we do all sorts of activities. Now, that's the case in Melbourne. uh, I would also assume Sydney is more or less the same, because Sydney is a big metropolitan city and also much more expensive than Melbourne. So presumably, it's even if people want kids, it's pretty hard to even afford them over there. I think parts of the country where it's less common to make this choice are more in places that are more in the outback, more regional, more rural. That's very, very kid centric and very family centric. So a part of the country, the capital of Australia, Canberra, is
Hmm.
very. I lived there for about 6 months of my life. That is a
Hmm.
very, very family centric place. So over there, I would assume that you would not find too many child free people, because everything is
Yeah.
set up over there for families, basically. And presumably, it's the same in in other states like Western Australia and everything else. So, but yeah, generally, if you're in a big city that's also mainly culturally diverse and cosmopolitan, like Melbourne, it's
Yeah.
quite normal and accepted to be child free.
Yeah. Well, and that seems to be the case, for many different countries. It's sort of interesting to see how these trends and patterns both mimic each other, but can be sort of unique from one another as well. So we know that for many of us who are on the fence about this decision, that we can grapple with this for a very long time. I personally was going back and forth for several years. It was probably getting close to a decade by the time I really committed myself to making a decision. And when we reach that point, that decision-making point where we realize this isn't just an answer that's magically going to appear, but that it's something we need to actually concretely, consciously decide, it's sort of this moment where it's like, enough is enough already. I'm tired of going in circles. I'm tired of the pros and cons lists or hoping the answer will just show up. I'm tired of reading the books or talking about this ad nauseum in therapy. And if you are at that point, if you are ready to finally make a decision about whether to have kids or stay child free, I want to invite you to join me for the summer session of my Kids or Child Free group coaching program. This is a 3-month-long program. We're going to be kicking off this round in the middle of July, and it's for those of you who are on the fence, you're trying to make a decision. Nothing that you've been doing has elicited a clear choice, and so you're ready to do something different. And if you want to join me as your guide to guide you through this process to help you get clear on the right path for you among a group of like-minded women who are also grappling with the same decision, I want you to check out my Kids or Child Free group coaching program. Again, we kick things off in July. I'm going to link to the details in the show notes of today's episode, but you can also find that under the Work With Me tab at kidsorchildfree.com. I look forward to having some of you join us for this session of Kids or Child Free. I'm interested to hear what sort of advice you might give someone if they are in one of these environments where there's a lot of, cultural, societal, maybe religious pressure for them to become a parent, and they're on the fence and they're really having trouble kind of connecting with what they want, or maybe they're leaning child free, but they're having trouble honoring that. What would you say to them?
I mean, obviously, one thing that's very important for them to establish is self-awareness. That is something that you have to really get good at. Now, I'm someone who was
Yeah.
born with it, but not everyone is. So, and that's something that you can actually
Mhm.
practice and develop over a period of time. And yeah, just being very clear about who you are, what you value, uh, what you don't, what you can't live with in your life, and what you can't live without in your life, so to
Yeah.
speak, and be very clear about it. And also, when someone asks you a question, and if you want to respond as no, whatever the reason is, that's a complete sentence. Or you could, even
Yeah.
if someone is when they're questioning you about your choice, you can just say no. I feel no need to give you any explanation for my choice. That's absolutely fine.
Mhm.
And you don't have to worry about upsetting somebody. You don't have to worry about offending somebody, because if people are offended or upset, they are not your people to begin with. So
Yeah.
that way the trash just takes itself out. So, and at the end of the day, you are doing this for yourself. You're not doing this for the rest of the world. You're not doing it for your parents, your partner, your friends, whatever. And it's absolutely okay. One thing I do recommend for people who are on the fence is babysit all types of kids on a regular basis, and
Mhm.
see what the experience is like. Take on, say, a family member's children or a friend's children. Take them on for a prolonged period of time. Actually, make it even more challenging. Don't ask without knowing anything about that child's daily routine, quirks, and things like that, because that's how parenting is. Because you don't know what you're going to get yourself into, and see how you find it, and then make your decision accordingly. I think people go into this, what I think is a very, not only life altering, but also irreversible decision with, they just do it willy nilly. They just do it without any putting any thought or any planning into it. And people like you and I, on the contrary, and ironically, we have put so much thought to our choice to be child free. And then what happens is, when they make this decision with no clarity and no understanding what it actually entails, and then they do a half-assed job of it, and they obviously can't go, you can't return the child, or because
Mm.
that's here to stay forever. The child is the one that suffers ultimately. So
Yeah.
I tell people to not just think about themselves, but also think about, it's another human being that you're bringing into this world. It's not a toy. It's not even a pet. I mean, if anything, I think you and I, we treat our pets like royalty. And people, I'm sure that when we adopted our dogs, they ran through so many checks about, are you a good home? Will you and things like that. Whereas any person on this planet can, if they're fertile, they can have a child. There is no consequences, or there's no accountability really on, or scrutiny really on, will this is this person, does even do they even have the credentials to be a good parent? Yeah, and I know for a fact that I will not, but I think of myself as a very loving and one of the best dog mums, and my dog will agree with that. But a human child, absolutely not. I know I
Yeah.
will be a ridiculous, I will be an awful mother, and I'm very glad that I've made the choice to only stick to being a dog mom, and I'm very happy with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Something that you shared with me when preparing for this is that you identify as an antinatalist. And so, first of all, I would love for you to just give voice to what that means for people who may not have heard of this term or aren't fully clear. And then I'm curious how you came to adopt this antinatalist view or perspective. So, tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So, antinatalism is a philosophy, well, more not just a philosophy, but a way of life that gives a negative meaning to birth. Because we, as antinatalists, we see bringing more life into this world, particularly human life. We're just focusing on that for the time being. Human life
Mhm.
as being, something that is going to cause nothing but suffering to the life that's coming in,
Mm.
for various reasons, because of the world that we live in at the moment, because it has so much instability, so many problems, so many challenges. And the other reason is that because no one consents to coming into this world, right? No one, you can't get consent from someone that doesn't exist. Like, let's draw an analogy. So because I work in healthcare, and in healthcare, before you perform a procedure on a patient, you
Mhm.
have to get their consent. You have to give them the whole spiel of what it's going to involve. that this is what
Yeah.
these will be the side effects, etc., etc., etc. This is how you do. This is how long
Mm.
it's going to take you to recover. Then you ask, do you consent in in going ahead with this procedure, whatever it may be. There is no such thing for bringing a life into this world, and you can't do that because something that doesn't exist can't give consent.
Yeah.
So essentially you are forcing somebody into existence doing something that they
Hmm.
never signed up for, and basically
Mm.
you are making them suffer in the type of world that we live in, that is overpopulated and overcrowded, where there are lack of resources. I can go on and on about the problems in the world. And how I got to antinatalism, it's very similar to how I learned of the word child free. So I did not know of a word child free till 2013. So I knew all my life that I didn't want to have kids, but only heard of the word child free, and I'm like, oh, I'm one of them. Very similar to antinatalism. So in India, as you know, it's one of the most overpopulated countries in the world. And I used to always ask my mom, why are people, this is me as a kid, why are people having biological children when there are so many orphans? Why don't people adopt? So as a child,
Hmm.
again, I was an antinatalist, but I didn't know what it was. There was no, I didn't hear of the term till 2020 during
Yeah.
COVID. And what happened was people in India started to follow a little bit of my work in the space, and I started to talk to them, and then they exposed me to what antinatalism is. And then I read up a little bit
Mm.
on it. I started to follow people who are antinatalists, and I'm like, it this makes sense. I have always been an antinatalist because I don't, as a child I always used to say that I don't want to add more people onto this world, especially in a country
Yeah.
like India, because as it is that the country is in shambles, and I don't want to make things worse. And but only in
Mm.
2020 I'm like, oh, there's a word for people like us. It's called antinatalism. I think the
Yeah.
challenge with antinatalism is that people do perceive us as being very cynical and very negative. And
Yeah.
to each their own. If they perceive us as being cynical and negative, I don't care. And we might be called selfish, but then again, we, who are we being selfish to? An entity or a
Mm.
human that does not exist. So, and it's not like they are desperate to be born into this world and we're depriving them of it. So
Yeah.
it can be seen as a selfless act of love, because you don't want them to suffer. You don't want them to come into the world where they didn't sign up for it, and just you know sort of have them sort of live vicariously through them when they didn't want
Mm.
to, when they never agreed to it. So yeah, and it's a similar reason why I adopted my dog. I'm very big
Yeah.
on, again, taking care of the ones who are already on this planet, be it humans, be it animals. And that's why I adopted my dog. I did not get him from a breeder as a puppy. So
Mm.
and I'm a big proponent of that. Let's take care of who's already here and give them a shot at life than adding more and
Yeah.
just making things worse overall.
Yeah. That makes sense. And I mean, from a philosophical standpoint, I'm curious. So, is the ant, because I know, I mean, I understand natalism and
Hmm.
anti-natalism, like as
Hmm.
from a linguistics perspective, but I don't know a lot about the overall philosophy or approach or way of living. I guess what's the stopping point that we should know that we societally or globally should cease to reproduce ever again so that humankind does not exist? Or is it more the idea that, like, as things being as they are, it's not sustainable to be doing that?
It's the latter. The people who we talked about in the former, they are what we call ethilists and nihilists. Now that's a
Yes.
different category completely.
Okay.
They want all humanity to cease existing. Do
Hmm.
I identify with them? Well, to an extent, because I think that humans are the most destructive, evil, and invasive species on the planet. So if
Hmm.
humans stop existing, the planet will rejoice, and animals will be happier.
Yeah.
The plants will be happier. So
Yeah.
I'm all for that. And if anything, I think I look at it in a more dignified way. I feel like, and again, not to go grim on all this, but you know, people are now talking now in certain countries in the world. I know in Netherlands and in Belgium and all that, there is voluntary assisted suicide, and it's given for people who feel that they don't have a quality of life anymore.
Hmm.
And that I'm a big proponent of that, and you don't
Yeah.
even have to give a reason why you don't want to live anymore. And I know people, they talk about suicide and all that. We're not going to go there, but basically, you know it's if you feel that you don't have if you don't have the quality of life that you want to have,
Mm-hmm.
and you just want to exit peacefully, you should be granted that. You don't
Mm.
even have to give an explanation as to why you want to do it. And we should be given that right, 100%. And because we do it for our animals, we euthanize them
Yeah.
when they don't have a quality of life. Why can't we do that for humans? So
Yeah.
yeah, so that's, I know that where I live in Melbourne, they are pushing for that now to really
Yeah.
do that. But again, it's in very extreme cases when you have like a terminal illness or whatever. But
Yeah.
I think everyone should be given that right. So yeah.
Mm. What would you say that somebody who's on the fence about whether or not to have kids can learn from this antinatalist philosophy? What, even if they themselves say, well, that's not quite my perspective, what do you think some teachings are for them to then more thoughtfully consider their own decision?
And I actually remember having this conversation with one of my friends who's now a mother, who was on the
Mhm.
fence for a very, very long time. And she would come to me and ask me, I'm not sure if I want to do this, because she was going back and forth. She, as it is a very indecisive person, unlike me. So
Mhm.
she asked me, what should I do? And I didn't sway her one way or the other. This was even despite me being an antinatalist, I didn't sway her into not having children. I laid it out to her in a very, very realistic way that, this is the situation that we have in this world, that we're going through a pandemic right now. That's when she came and asked me, should I have children or not? So, and then you were going through a global pandemic. There is war, there is hunger, there is poverty, there is, every imaginable bad thing. You may give your unborn child the best chance in life, but you're not going to be there around forever. So when you're gone, they will have to
Mhm.
live in this type of world, which will probably be exponentially worse. There
Mm.
will come a time where they will be struggling to find, and that is a big problem nowadays. People are struggling to find housing, to find food, just basic things and that's the kind of world that you are leaving them for. That's the legacy that you're leaving for them. And at the same time, I told her, your child, and my friend, she used to work with autistic kids, very, very low functioning
Okay.
autistic kids. And I've asked her this question when she was on the fence. I asked her, what if your child is autistic? What if your child
Mm.
has a disability? So, and she's the type of person who always told me she loves babies and she's always been good with children. She loves children, but she does not like teenagers. And I told her, your child will not remain a baby and toddler for the rest of its life. It's going to become a teenager and
Mm.
going to be people like you and I. Are you going to be okay living with that? Now, she's gone past all that and she's had a child and she's pretty happy with her choice. But I do remember she telling me, I can completely understand why you have chosen not to do this. So I know that this is, and she told me this is very, very exhausting. It's incredibly hard. I completely understand why you've chosen not to do this. So, again, I have a mom friend who's very supportive of my choice, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of how, so not just focus on yourself and what you want. So stop being that
Yeah.
selfish, but also
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
about not just about yourself and your genes and your legacy. Think about the world from a bigger picture. What kind of life, or what kind of what kind of a future does your unborn child have, uh,
Yeah.
if there is one to begin with, and decide accordingly and adopt. If you can adopt and foster. I would always, we do it for our dogs, adopt, don't shop. So do it for, why can't we do it for humans as well? I think that's always a better
Yeah.
solution in every way.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I want to talk a little bit about mental health, and it's actually a topic we haven't tabled in great depth or really too much at all, surprisingly, in any of these previous conversations we've had. And I know for me, the child-free choice certainly it was not solely based on mental health struggles and challenges that I'd had, but it definitely was in consideration of those. And I know you shared with me that that's something that was also maybe not part of your decision in the sense that you've obviously always had this sort of innate desire to, or lack of desire to have kids, but that it's still something that's reinforced this decision. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So, my dad's side of the family has a long history of mental health problems. So there's bipolar, there's schizophrenia, you name it. So, a lot of people in my father's side of the family, they had all these problems. So they had OCD, you name it. And,
Mm.
despite that, because of the country that I grew up in and the culture that I grew up in, mental health was something that you just did not talk about. You did not ever tell anybody that you are feeling depressed, because people will, they'll give you either stupid advice or they'll just brush it under the carpet. So that's what it used to be many, many years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I started to have mental health problems, or they started to resurface rather. Maybe it was, again, I probably had that gene from on my father's side of the family. I don't know, but they
Mm-hmm.
started to come to the surface when I was in my early 20s. And
Mm-hmm.
there were periods when it was really, really, really bad as well. It was very, very severe. It was quite significant. And yeah, at that point, and even though at that point I was very clear that I didn't want to have kids, and till date, I know if it's not as severe as what it used to be, I'm now in a place where I can manage my mental health. And I
Yeah.
know that if I had to also, balance parenthood, motherhood specifically, on top of being, on top of managing my mental health, it would be impossible, and I would just be a complete nervous wreck.
Mm.
For that reason, because I saw people in my family having mental health challenges and parenting at the same time, and because of the
Yeah.
way they parented, they unconsciously passed it on to their children.
Yeah.
Even though they may not, there may be a slight genetic component to it, but also the environment that you grew up in makes a huge difference. And
Yeah.
for me, again, for me to just on a basic on a basic level to function, I have to live in a clutter free, a quiet space. I like having my own space. I like that. I have to have that freedom to be able to make my own decisions, to be able to choose what I want to do with my time. And without that, I cannot function. And I cannot
Mm.
live in an environment that's noisy, that's chaotic, because all of those things will trigger my anxiety. They will trigger my
Yeah.
panic. So, all those things. So, that's why, for me, the way I've set up my life now is that I'm the exposure to those triggers is at its minimum, and
Yeah.
I want to keep it that way. So for me, mental health is probably the number two reason why I've made my choice, and it makes sense because, again, as I said, everything that children bring, living with a child brings, will be very, very detrimental to my mental health, and also the relentless, the sheer intensity and relentlessness of motherhood. That itself will also take a massive toll on my mental health, and it'll be irreversible. And I also don't want to put someone unborn through that. So that's why.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for speaking to that. And I relate to a lot of what you share with that. I know for me, I also sometimes feel like, staying or trying to remain mentally well. And also, I struggle with anxiety and I've had periods of depression. I feel like that can feel kind of precipitous and it's a balance to maintain. And obviously having children and by no means is the implication that if you struggle with your mental health you shouldn't have children, but it does require that additional work and really being conscientious about how am I going to manage this, not just if it's me or me and a partner, but if we have a child or children in the mix. You said your number two reason is mental health, and I think you, without stating it so obviously, shared your number one reason, but what's your number one reason for remaining child free?
I don't want the responsibility. Simple.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
don't want the
Yeah,
responsibility of
fair.
parenthood, because my freedom and my independence is number one.
Yeah.
Nothing takes
Yeah.
priority over that. So yeah.
Yeah, no, freedom's definitely what came through our conversation so far, and that ability to like do what you want when you want, which is a huge driver for me as well. Okay, cool. Something that you shared was that the work you've been doing in, I think you said it was the healthcare care communication coaching space,
Yes.
has been helping to support child-free women, and specifically around the wish to be sterilized. Can you talk a
hmm
little bit about that and the work you do in that
Now,
area?
it's not the sole thing that I talk about in my coaching space, but
Yeah.
it is something that
Mhm.
I have spoken about in the past, and it is patient autonomy. And I
Okay.
don't just mention it in terms of giving healthcare providers the skills and tools and strategies to be able to respect patient autonomy. not just in getting sterilized, but also for other things. Like, for example, quite recently, I posted a video. I did a video series on menopause, for example. So,
Hmm.
and the way in which menopause patients are treated in the healthcare system, and again,
Yeah.
their wishes, their what they're saying, what patients tell their healthcare providers, it's not respected, and they just get
Yeah.
pushed into this system like a cog in a machine, and they're just given HRT or antidepressants, mindlessly, and instead of really honoring what the patient wants. And if you draw the
Hmm.
same analogy, it's about, again, healthcare providers who don't respect a woman's bodily autonomy. Now, I remember
Yeah.
having an example like this. This was well before I started, about 5 or 6 years ago. I remember going in for a pelvic ultrasound, and the sonographer was this Chinese man, and he looked at my referral and everything, and he asked me, just without even knowing anything about me or why I'm there. First time I was consulting with him, he was like, "Are you doing this pelvic ultrasound with the hope of getting pregnant?" I'm like, "Well, where
Hmm.
did you get that from?" Just because I'm a woman and I'm
Mm.
coming for a pelvic ultrasound, you just assumed
Yeah.
automatically that I'm in here for pregnancy. And I told him flat out, it's if I had my way, I would remove my uterus altogether, because I don't ever want children. So
Mm.
that's the other thing. And also, yeah. So what I aim to do with the clients that I work with is the ones who are in the OBGYN space, and also the ones like this guy who are again talking, dealing with patients all the time, is to not assume a lot of things, that just because you're a woman of a certain age, that all your healthcare needs are to be centered around whether or not she's going to have children in the future. If
Hmm.
they want
Yeah.
to get sterilized, you have to absolutely honor and respect that, and not push your own biases and judgments and criticism and whatever else, because
Hmm.
your legal system is telling you, your religion is telling you, all of that doesn't matter. Yes, by all means,
Yeah.
go through the process of informing them of what this involves, and the safety risks, the everything, the side effects, whatever. That's absolutely fine, and get their
Hmm.
consent. But please don't. That is something that I'm sort of, it's hard, because this is where people find my some of what I do quite controversial, because they feel
Mm.
that I'm um, undermining the ethical side of the healthcare field. I mean, no, not really, because I'm advocating for patients, because more often than not, they have been trained to not do that for themselves. So
Yeah.
I'm being the voice for them, and I'm equipping the healthcare providers who are working with these patients to actually treat them with the respect that they deserve. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's important work. So I certainly thank you for doing so. And yeah, I mean, obviously, common thread with all these kind of challenges you mentioned is they're women's health issues, concerns, and livelihoods. So thank you for helping. I mean, it's kind of a sad state of our world to have to teach people this empathy, respectfulness, and openness to women's wishes. But if it needs to be done, it sounds like you're the woman
Someone's got
for
to
the
do the
job.
hard work.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So I guess shortly before we wrap things up here, as we talked about earlier in the episode, I mean, you've done an impressive amount of travel. Have been many, many places in the world. Still, of course, much to see. But I'm curious if you have either like an interesting or funny or notable story about your child-free status and how that's been received with your travel. Something that stands out that has happened.
I mean, quite recently when I went to Sri Lanka, that was actually with
Hmm.
with a group of child-free women. So that was
Okay.
so that was really good. So we all had the same. The trip was exclusively for women who don't want children and don't have children. So that worked out
Hmm.
extremely well. But what I also liked is the fact that a country like Sri Lanka, which is very similar to India in very pro-natalist and
Hmm.
everything like that, they were open to hosting women like us who've made this choice. So, which I
Yeah.
found very impressive. And and all of us, when we traveled together, we shared, a lot of our reasons for why we're child free, and they we shared, some of us. Our struggles and some of our challenges, which the others have, I didn't.
Hmm.
And it was interesting. I actually, because I was the oldest in the group, and so I was like a big sister to everybody, and some of them would come and tell me, oh, I broke up with my boyfriend of 9 years. I was about to get married to this person,
Mm.
and these are girls in their 20s, and I
Yeah.
just told them, your 20s are the last time of your life to be worrying about settling down with a man and having babies. do what you're doing right now, which is travel the world, experiment with life, make as many mistakes, take your risks, and take your time in finding the right person. Because you are also child free by choice, you don't have a time limit, you don't have a biological clock to worry about. You
Yeah.
can you can take your own time in finding the right person, and if you don't, it's absolutely fine. It's not the end of the world for you.
Yeah.
I was very much the voice of reason for a lot of them who
Yeah.
were very confused about what it was. And I obviously shared examples of my relationship, of how I
Yeah.
managed to meet my now partner and the kind of life that we're living. And
Yeah.
I again told them that when you are dating, be very clear about what you want and don't want, and don't
Hmm.
hide the fact. Don't be with someone for 3 years and then you tell them, oh, I guess what, I don't want children. So bring that up
Yeah.
very early, and also be very clear about what you want and don't want, and tell them. Don't
Yeah.
worry about, and if they disappear after that, they were never yours to begin with. So
Yep. Amen. Okay, before we wrap things up, I have my infamous 5 rapid fire questions. The
yes.
first 2 are finish this sentence. So,
Hmm.
being child free is,
The best decision I made.
being child free is not.
Only because I am career driven, which I'm not. A lot of people in my extended family are child free because they're career driven. I'm not.
Mhm. Okay. What is one thing that you think would make this decision for those who are on the fence a little bit easier, either societally, culturally speaking, etc.?
As I said, I would say the whole, what I mentioned previously, was about the try and babysit family members, and
Yeah.
without any heads up on what they're like, and do it in real time and see what it's like, and do it on a regular
Yeah.
basis with different types of kids.
Okay. Oof, sounds like a lot of work. I think I'm just going to stay child free. What is one?
Mhm.
Yeah, your exercise worked on me. What's
Mhm.
one thing that you want parents to know, or moms specifically? Let's say, what's one thing you want moms to know?
Mothers don't have a monopoly on tiredness, stress, worry, uh, suffering, whatever else. Yeah. And empathy and
Yeah,
compassion and maternal feelings, because child free people can be
yeah,
nurturing and maternal too. It's not,
yeah,
and it may be towards children, by all means. That doesn't mean that they won't be mothers.
yeah.
I know a lot of child free people who are very maternal towards children, but they still don't want
Hmm.
to. They don't want to be mothers. And I'm very maternal towards not only dogs but animals in general. But it's
Yeah,
zero towards humans.
yeah, yeah. Okay. All right. Lastly, if you could give one piece of advice to someone who's currently on the fence about whether to have kids or stay child free, what would that advice be?
Work with a coach like you.
I love when
Yeah,
people say that. I'm like,
yeah,
you can come back on
yeah,
the show anytime you want.
yeah.
The best
So
was when I interviewed my mom and she's like, hire my daughter. I was like, yeah, mom.
yeah, yeah. I mean, because look, I couldn't. At one point, I was considering going down coaching child-free women, but I thought to myself, like it's much more authentic coming from someone like you, because you were on the fence for a long time yourself, and then you navigated
Yeah.
your way around it, and then you decided finally. Whereas for me, what will I do? If like, I'm one of those odd, weird people who knew all her life that I didn't want to have children. So, and
We're
the way
jealous of
I
you for
coach
your
somebody might
certainty.
be, yeah, and quite be, I might be very polarizing in the way I coach somebody.
Mm,
So, it's a good thing I changed my niche. So and I'm very happy about that. So
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Shweta. Is there anything people need to know in terms of where they can find you, what you're up to? What would you like to
Sure.
share?
Just follow me on Instagram. You'll obviously leave that in the show notes. And if you check now, I
Yes.
think on Instagram, when you click on one of in the bio, you can see
Hmm.
your other profiles, like your Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok. So yeah, just go there
Yeah.
and click everything, and yeah, just
Okay.
wherever you can, you just want to follow me. But most of my child free life stuff I post is on Instagram. So yeah, feel free to follow me there.
Awesome. Okay. We will definitely link to that in the show notes. Thank you so much for being on here today, for sharing so openly. Like I said, I think there's a lot we can learn from someone, even who is so definitive as you about this decision, because you really serve as an example of someone who's listened to and followed your own heart, your own desires. And I think you've given us some sort of like tough love today too, that we need to go out there and like tune out the noise and help align ourselves with what we want. So thank you for that.
Of course, thank you so much for having me. It's been really enjoyable.
Thank you for tuning in for this episode of the Kids or Child Free podcast. Now, I have a few new goodies for you over on the free resources page, which you'll find at kidsorchildfree.com. I will also link to this in today's show notes. And the new resources that I've added are a podcast episode, a secret podcast episode, if you will. It's a recording that I made prior to launching the Kids or Child Free podcast. And it's actually a very personal share of mine related to a situation that happened with a friend of mine. And it really talks about how triggering this kids or child-free decision can be. It's vulnerable. There may or may not be a few tears shed, and it's available exclusively when you head to the free resources page and sign up for it at kidsorchildfree.com. The other resource I recently added is the replay of the event we had earlier in the spring, which was the Between Friends conversation I had with my friend Lauren Grant, who is a filmmaker. She is a mom. And we talked all about how we've maintained our friendship throughout all the ups and downs that motherhood and this decision that I've made has brought. We talk about how you personally can navigate some of the concerns and the challenges that you might be having in your friendships when one of you has kids and the other one doesn't. Again, check it out. That's at kidsorchildfree.com under the free resources tab. Thank you again for listening today, and we'll see you back here soon for another episode of the Kids or Child Free podcast.